Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Rich and Turbo Heavy Half Hour. A very, very special episode of the Rich and Turbo Heavy Half Hour. As you know as a listener, my name's Rich. You can find me on X at FuzzDoomRip and all the socials at rich.piva, doing reviews for Musipedia of Metal and as a Doom Charts contributor. Turbo is here as well. Turbo, you want to say hello to everyone?
Hello everyone.
Short and sweet as usual. Thank you, Turbo. We are extremely excited to have guitarist and songwriter from one of my all-time favorite bands, Screaming Trees, Gary Lee Conner, with us on the show. How are you?
How you doing? Oh, pretty good.
Pretty good. It's amazing to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Your music has meant so much to myself and to Turbo, I think, speaking for him. Thank you. Kind of what triggered this and triggered this conversation is that you are launching a repress of Screaming Trees' first record, Clairvoyance, which came out originally February 13th of 1986, and it hasn't been on vinyl forever, right? So tell us a little bit about
that. The date's not. I think it was more like the middle of the summer, and it must have been the end of the summer.
I can't trust Wikipedia.
No, I don't know where they. Sometimes the dates on the major label stuff is usually right, but yeah, sometimes, especially that one, because we were still working on it on February 13th of 1986, probably. So it's we found about a year or two ago, we found the multi-track tapes, the actual, they're 8 tracks. It was all recorded on an 8-track Atari machine. They were at Velvetone Studio the whole time, and I had no idea, and nobody else did either, because we'd always thought that Mark Lanegan had he went down. We had him go down after we moved to Seattle. We were on Epic to get all the tapes, like the SST tapes and any tapes like from Velvetone, and take them and store them somewhere, but. So we thought they were gone because in those years in the 90s, he might have had them at his apartment, and then he got kicked out of his apartment once or twice, and they disappeared. And there was always a rumor that he had pawned the tapes, and I had tracked that down to find where he had supposedly pawned them at a pawn shop close to his house on Capitol Hill in Seattle. And it turned out that he didn't pawn any Screaming Trees tapes, except for there's one with a few songs and demos from later in the 90s that's got some pretty cool stuff. But no SST and no Clairvoyance tapes or anything were there. And I was like, oh man, that sucks, because they had some of his own tapes. He pawned some of his own tapes. So he did pawn some tapes, but not the famous lost Velvetone tapes. So we don't know what happened to those tapes. But a couple of years ago, we found he didn't get Clairvoyance. That was still at Velvetone, and so we got that all digitally, baked the tapes, put it on digital, and then Jack and Dino last year mixed it all, and there's 7 other tracks that didn't get on the record. So it's a double record with 17 songs. The 10 songs are on one side of the original album, and the 7 outtakes that had never been released before on side 2. Yeah, and everything's remixed. The only thing that wasn't remixed was the song "The Turning," because that was, it was also on. It was on From Other Worlds, our first tape, and it was later on SST, and that was apparently the reel for that, because it was the same exact song on Clairvoyance and on Other Worlds. So we didn't have a multi-track of that, but it was remastered though. So everything pretty much is completely remixed, and it's going to be a double record with a gatefold, and there's a couple different vinyl variants, red and blue translucent. That's going to be available starting tomorrow on our Port Merchandise Screaming Tree store, and then Revolver Magazine is going to sell one on their store, which is a marbled green and marbled red vinyl.
Very cool. That is
so,
awesome.
And there's going to be a few in stores, mostly in the Northwest, probably in August. So it's limited to 1,500 total. So
those of us who are banging our heads against the wall for not having an original and didn't want to spend the $350 on Discogs for it, this is a much better situation, I think, for everybody involved.
Well, it's so rare. I mean, there were only originally we pressed 1,000, and then we made one more pressing of another 1,000. It was never pressed on vinyl again. It was available on CD for Lanigan. He didn't even tell us about it. He's like in 2005, he gave it to Hall of Records. I don't even know what label that was. They put it out on CD in about 2005, but it had to have been from the vinyl, like a needle drop, because there was no way he could have got it, or from a tape maybe, but not the original tapes. So he didn't have any of the original tapes. So yeah, I don't know what's exactly on that CD, but it's probably like I said, some type of needle drop or something like that. But the new mixes are a lot. The drums are kind of weird sounding on the original one, because Steve Fisk was like, we thought he was like a studio wizard, and he was doing, we were all learning from each other, and this was our first record, and it was one of his first records I think he produced. So it was kind of a weird sounding record, but this sound, Jack Anino has remixed it, and it sounds much more, straightforward rock album.
It's
I think everyone's gonna like it a lot.
I think
like it a lot.
No, people are gonna go crazy for this. I think this is kind of one of those holy grail records for Trees fans. I have some questions about the record, just in general. So you mentioned the turning, and how come that song made it to Clairvoyance and not some of the other songs on Other Worlds?
That's a good question, because I mean, the thing is, we had at least 4 or 5 songs besides that are the ones on the second side of this thing that we could have put on the record instead of Turning 2. I think we just thought that was like the catchiest song from Other Worlds, and we had no other plans at the time of what to do with the stuff on Other Worlds. We actually, before we got signed to SST, we've been working on what ended up becoming Even If and Especially When, our first SST record. And we were going to use the songs from Other Worlds and about 4 or 5, maybe 6 new songs we were working on. Because I included, I think, The Pathway, In the Forest, some stuff like that. And that stuff, it was going to be Other Worlds with that. That was going to be like the second record on Bellatone, but it never came. There's actually a tape somewhere that has all that stuff together on it. I've seen it. I don't have it, but I've seen a picture of it somewhere.
We need to have you get that. Turbo, before I completely take over this interview and just start peppering him with questions, what do you have for him to start around this record?
As far as Clairvoyant goes?
Or whatever you want to ask. Yeah. I'm staying in this era to start.
Okay. I read something about where y'all just played when you were recording. I don't know, was it Clairvoyant or was it the one before where it was like you just set up a live setting and just played and went for it instead of doing each track separately?
Well, let's see. We didn't have very many tracks to do separately because it was an 8-track, right? I'm probably most of the stuff we did that just overdub guitar stuff. But in the early days, I don't even know Mark sang along with it. Later on, we did that. Like in the studio, we usually at least play. That's probably what we were talking about, the live record that we did that set, the Wrong Turn to Jehanam that came out a year and a half ago. That was like in the Egg Studio. It was only recorded on 6 tracks, and we were recording some demos. And we're just like, let's go through a live set. And we said, okay. So we just played a live set in the studio. That ended up being that record. That might be the way we talk. Yeah, but mostly, that's the way we had to do it at Velvetone Studio, because, we pretty much always use the bass and the guitar for the basic tracks, and we have room to overdub like a guitar solo. And we had to bounce a little bit to get room for backup vocals, But bounce the drums down to stereo probably. So didn't have a lot of tracks to work with. I mean, we did all up till Invisible Lantern that we did, on 8 tracks. So
it's interesting, obviously being from where you were from and the bands that you kind of incorporated into that grunge sound. You're obviously one of the first bands that are credited there.
Yeah.
But to me, it's very interesting that you do when you listen to the first couple of records. Obviously, you're on the Children of Nuggets record or
Yeah,
compilation, which is
that was one of the coolest things ever.
yeah, not like a super grunge band thing to do. I think the
No.
Posies were like the closest to like a maybe
Yeah.
a grungy band that was on there. But like how this is going to be a complex question, but how did you go from kind of this like almost Paisley Underground like psych stuff transition to ultimately being like what people know you most for with Sweet Oblivion and Nearly Lost You? Like how did that whole transition happen?
Well, part of it, I think. Well, part of it was because I wrote pretty much all the songs up till almost all the records except for Sweet Oblivion. And Sweet Oblivion was the one record where everybody got together and we wrote everything together. Plus Barrett was like, our new drummer, and he played a little bit more, a little less garagey and a little more solid, like, Zeppelin type of thing. And so I think because in the beginning, see, the thing was, I mean, probably hear this on some of the tracks on side B of Clairvoyance. There's a couple songs that are just total psychedelic, and there's a couple more that are more kind of straight rock kind of things. I think everybody else in the band besides me they didn't want to be like a Paisley Underground type band. I totally wanted to be a Paisley Underground type band. That was my whole thing, because like I was totally into Pebbles and the English, Rubble on Bam Caruso, and I'd just been getting into that the last year or two before the band started, and everything I wrote was totally like psychedelic. I mean, that's what Lanigan had to always rein in the lyrics. Is like, I can't sing this stuff, so he changed them to be, depending on what song. Um, there was, but yeah, so that's probably the main reason, because I wanted to be a total psychedelic band and nobody else did. They wanted to be this sort of a rock punk kind of. They didn't know what they wanted to be, but they definitely didn't want to be like the Flaming Lips or something like that. And we even it's interesting because we got an offer right at the time of getting the SST offer from Pink Dust, the label that Flaming Lips are on, that Restless subsidiary. So that was
That would have been a whole different world.
Yeah, it could have gone a whole different way.
Yeah.
I mean, if Mark hadn't have been in the band, we would have been, I don't know, I don't even know if we would have done a record first, but if we had, we probably would have done 2 or 3 records, and they would have, been like, oh, that weird psychedelic band from, if anyone even had heard of us, and that would have been it. We wouldn't have had our second career, because it was pretty much, two different things. There was the SST era and kind of a transition with Uncle Anesthesia, because those songs were definitely still in the same type of vein as the earlier stuff. It was just we suddenly had 24 tracks to work with instead of, we did do 16 on Buzz Factory. That was like, a reciprocal with Jack and Dino. So
well, it's interesting though. Like I'm thinking of the timeline here of kind of right before Uncle Anastasia. Where isn't that when you did the Purple Outside record? Like right before that?
Yeah, that was we were all going to do solo records. We were going to do kind of like the Kiss albums, the solo. I know the Melvins did that too, right around the same time on SST. And Van had the Solomon Grundy, his band, and I did the Purple Outside record, and Mark was going to do a solo record. But he ended up, that was right at the time he moved to Seattle, and he got hooked up with the Sub Pop guys and decided to do it over there. And they put ours on New Alliance, which was that subsidiary SST label. And so that was definitely, those were songs that a lot of those were going to be Screaming Tree songs. We recorded them summer '88. Like some of the songs like When I'm Gone and like White Plastic. And we don't have there's some pretty bad sounding cassette versions of that stuff, so I don't know if it's ever going to come out as other than like YouTube. But it was just like, I guess they were a little too psychedelic.
I was going to say, was it like your outlet to now kind of keep that exactly. sound alive kind of thing?
Yeah, that was the thing, because I knew that we kind of wanted to go in a slightly different direction, and right, that was exactly the same time where I wrote "Changes Come," and that was kind of like, oh, let's go in a different direction. I don't know. I actually had you ever listen to the Eastern Dark Australian band? So yeah, you should check them out. They're amazing. Like it was one of those things where we got their EP, and the EP says, "Unfortunately, James Derr was killed in a car accident. Like the singer was dead when we got the record." But love that record, and I didn't rip it off. I was kind of inspired to write a kind of different kind of song, and that's how Changes Come came together. The funny thing is with this Changes Come EP though, where the rest of the songs are like total psychedelic sort of thing. I mean, like especially like the song Days, which is probably one of the most psychedelic because it's actually the original title Days in a Glass Cube. So
Yeah, there you go.
that's what he says on the chorus. He didn't cut that out of the chorus. He just changed the name.
Well, just going back to kind of after Clairvoyance and signing to SST, was that? I know you work with Steve Fisk, and he was involved. Was SST like a target because there were specific bands that you were digging on that label, or was it just one that kind of came about?
It would be like a pipe dream, like you're not in a million years type of thing. I mean, that was like it's still like to me, other than the unfortunate stuff with them being weird about not paying people and not wanting to give stuff back and that kind of stuff. Other than that, like just the isolated being on SST was the coolest thing in my life ever. I think that probably everyone else would say that too. That was like the pinnacle of like we're on SST. And I remember one of the first shows we played with SST band was with the Fire Hose. We went down to Wall.
Wow.
And we were just like, totally starstruck meeting Mike Watt and George Hurley and stuff. But that was, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it would be like a pipe dream. But, it just happened that Steve knew a guy, Ray Farrell, who later worked with Nirvana and stuff at DGC. He worked at SST and he helped. We had gone down to Los Angeles to do a few shows right after Clairvoyance came out. And, he got the guys to come down and watch us like they play. I'm not sure which place it was, but about 3 months later is when we got a phone call, like what was it, February or something like 87, and from Greg Ginn, and we were all like working at the New World video store, and like, who's on the phone? It's Greg Ginn. It's like, what? We're like, from Black Flag, what the heck? And Mark talked to him, and he was just going to be not saying like, oh, we want you on our label. Final Lanigan says, so what? You want us to be on your label? I was like, yeah. And we're just like fainting, basically. It still feels, it's just it was so cool because they were this great label as far as artistically. You could just it wasn't like you could get very much money to record a record, a couple $1,000 or something, but anything that you did, they put out. It wasn't about selling records or anything. It was probably part of their downfall because they had too many bands and weren't selling any records. I mean, that happens with so many labels, But while it lasted, it was just great for a lot of bands,
Yeah, I mean, just looking at, Dinosaur Jr., Meat Puppets, Husker Du, Soundgarden, like bands that became huge, but also those influential bands that were there you mentioned.
Yeah, then you even had like Sonic Youth come in there. But I think they realized probably it was a mistake pretty quickly because they got off pretty quick. But yeah. So it was a big deal, and it was more than just Greg Ginn. There were a lot of other like Dukowski was working there at the time, and we never met Joe Carducci, but I think he might have been gone by the time we got there. But yeah, it was like there was a lot of cool people that worked there. Ginn was not yet the total boss, and I think people left, and then by 1989 they started having. So that's when we knew that we should realize we probably were going to have to get a different label because when we went on tour in the spring of '89 for Buzz Factory, we got out on the road, and it's like the records weren't in the stores, and that was kind of a problem. So because they were supposed to be, and. Yeah, so something was going on with them right then, and then that's when we, we're either going to hang it up or try to go for the major label thing. Because that was right about the time, I think the Meat Puppets had just got signed to a major. So that was kind of like our inspiration to, we'll give it a try too.
Yeah, and good thing that you did. Turbo, as usual, I'm dominating. Please.
That's
I just picked up on something when you said you mentioned Rebel. Is that where your dog's name comes from?
I want to say that after we got him, it was already named. Actually, I think somebody uh, named him that from that. Was it Rescue Pet Show? But I'll tell people that it was from the Rumble compilation. Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, I of course thought of that as soon as we got him. It's like, well, I'll just tell people.
I saw that video that you put out not too long ago where you and him just sitting there in the field
Oh
playing.
yeah, yeah. That's going to be this guy Sean Park from Ellensburg is making a documentary about Mark Lanigan's early days and the Screaming Trees all in Ellensburg, and he's been interviewing. He flew down here to Texas and interviewed me, and we went out back and did that. That was pretty fun. So
Very
that's
cool.
gonna. I'm not sure when he's putting out a like what do you call it, test reel or something pretty soon. I don't know when it's actually going to come out, but
Very cool.
Looking
eventually, it
forward to
will.
that.
Yeah,
Just kind of going back to the Clairvoyance days, like 1985. Like, what was the scene like? You know, I think it would be too easy to ask you what the scene was like when everything blew up with grunge and
yeah,
everything. But what was it like in like 85, 86 when you were putting
yeah.
out, you know, Other
Well,
Worlds and Clairvoyance
we
and
were
stuff?
had no idea there was any kind of scene in Seattle. You know, I guess our only contact was through a couple records that we bought. Like I remember we had the Green River record, and I remember we had Melvin's first EP, and a few things like the U-Men. You know, when we'd go over because Ellensburg's like 100 miles from Seattle, and it's over the mountains, which it's not a bad drive except for in the winter. It's like the pass is all snowy and stuff. So, but we didn't go over to Seattle very much. You know, we once in a while go over and go to like big concerts because we didn't even know about the small ones. If I like nowadays, I look at all these things that were going on, then it's like I missed that. I should have probably go to it. Later we did, but we buy records, and some of the record stores had local bins, and we buy some of those records. So that was all we knew. So basically, we had no scene. There was zero. The only music scene in Ellensburg were like the older like '70s bands, like they were kind of country rock, and there was one band in town called Lucky Pierre that had done a record, and we were like, oh my god, they had a record, you know, and nothing that had ever been. There was I guess what the closest there was a band called the Bards that was from uh, Afraid of Washington, which is 50 miles further east into eastern Washington. A guy who was Justin Warren, who's in band Moral Crux. They were from there too, and they had a few records in the '90s and late '80s. But his dad was in the Bards. I've seen some pictures of them. They were like sort of slightly known band in the Northwest. But as far as Eastern Washington, almost no bands had ever come from there before. So it was definitely completely like the only reason we even uh, did anything was because of Steve Fisk. We had got he had a single. What was it called? Anonymous. We didn't know about Pell Mell or any of the stuff he had been in, but and we were like, this guy is working at the studio. And we were like, there's a studio in Ellensburg, So we're just like, this was right about the time we got together in summer '85, and we decided to go down there and book some time to record the songs that because when we got together, we were just playing covers. Like, we'd play like Black Flag and Jimi Hendrix covers, sort of. That was just for fun. But then Mark Lanegan, like I just got a 4-track about a year before. I had some songs I was working on, which mostly the stuff on Other Worlds. And he was like, I played him for him. It's like, geez, we should do these songs, So that's when we decided to actually record them and do our own songs, which was for Ellensburg quite a huge step because you couldn't play a show doing your own songs in Ellensburg because the band we had before that was Pickrell was a drummer, and Van sang. We had a couple other people in it. We played around town a little bit and just did covers. We did punk rock covers and new wave and '60s stuff and some '70s. Just stuff we liked. But you played high school dances. That was basically about it, or bars. But the bars were mostly reserved for like the Lucky Pierre. What was the other band? Greasewood, the Nash band, some of those bands and stuff like that. But yeah, it was like completely, going into like we have no idea what we're doing. We don't know how to get on a record label, how to play shows. We had no concept of a club scene or music scene. That all came later. Our first taste of all that, though, was Olympia and Calvin Johnson, with Beat Happening, because Steve knew him. And it turned out that Calvin had actually lived in Ellensburg and was in my class in 8th grade. And I remembered his name. I was like, this can't be the same guy, Calvin Johnson. So the first show we ever played at all, it was in Olympia. And we went over there and met Calvin. He had K cassettes going and stuff. And he helped us, distribute the Other Worlds tape and stuff. And then we played a lot of shows later with Olympia. So that was really the first music scene we kind of were part of, was Olympia,
And is that how you wound up with the split with Beat Happening?
Yeah.
Based on that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That because people don't, especially having the whole Seattle grunge thing, they don't understand that we were much more, a different. We never were part of the Seattle music scene ever until we were, until we were, we never really were.
I was going to say maybe the single soundtrack. I mean, was that the start of it?
Yeah. See. So the whole band was in Ellensburg until finally in late '88, Lanigan moved over to Seattle. That was if you lived in Ellensburg, that was kind of the goal, eventually move to Seattle, because Ellensburg was a tiny town, 15,000 people, 100 miles from nowhere, in the middle of nowhere. And so Mark moved over there, and then I think Pickerel moved over there just a little after that. And so, of course, when we got on Epic and we decided to record the record, it was obvious we were going to do it in Seattle. So Van and me moved over there too. Although we had just enough money to get an apartment from Epic, $600 a month, which and we after we finished the record, we didn't have any more money, so we had to move back to Ellensburg. But about a year later, I ended up moving to Seattle. And so, 1991 was really the first time I was actually in Seattle going to shows, and that was when we were working on the Sweet Oblivion record. But we weren't just part of that.
How did you wind up on? Because I think probably, and you would correct me if I'm wrong here, but I guess the biggest break would probably wind up being on that single soundtrack. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. I mean, we sell or we make more money off of Nearly Lost You than by probably 20 times more even than our second highest thing. I think what's second highest? Maybe All I Know, from Dust or something like that. But that's we had an actual hit. It was, I don't know what the numbers were on some of the radio things, but it was a radio hit. And, but the records, Sweet Oblivion is really close to selling 500,000 copies. I think it sold last time I heard it was 420,000 or something a couple of years ago. So if we play our cards right, we might someday get a gold record. I mean, we got a platinum record from singles, but it's not quite the same when it's not your own record,
How did you wind up on singles? Did somebody
that
reach
was
out?
It was mostly a label thing, I guess. Because we were on Epic. What's this? Is soundtrack on Columbia? I can't remember. It's some kind of Sony thing anyway. And it was apparently, this is kind of ironic that Truly, the band with Mark Pickerel and Hiro Yamamoto with Robert Roth played in at that right after the Trees. They were supposed to be on it with some song called Heart and Lungs, I believe. And I didn't even find this out till 20 years later, so I didn't feel bad at the time that they got kicked off it, because I guess our A&R guy talked them into changing it up and putting us on there. And being the only problem was eventually the MTV thing, we had to share the buzz clip thing with Paul Westerberg, so we didn't get near as much airplay as you would have otherwise. But it definitely made us have a hit. Yeah. So that wasn't really ever our goal, but it was oh, okay, now we have a hit. What are we supposed to do now? I don't know. We just wanted to make good records, so.
I have a memory of seeing you guys on Jones Beach, and I think it was the MTV something tour with Spin Doctors and Soul Asylum.
Yeah, alternative Nation tour.
Yes.
Yeah, all the bands were on Epic or Columbia or whatever, and yeah, that was like, yeah, I did not like the Spin Doctors.
I was going to say I did not stay for the Spin Doctor set.
No, yeah, we didn't either. We left every. One time Barrett played congas with them, and we had to stay. We're like, oh no, yeah. I mean, I didn't mind their that one song, Two Princes. I thought it was kind of, it's kind of all right, but yeah, I didn't. And plus, they had the weird association with the jam band thing, which I never really understood. But I guess they kind of did more jamming type of stuff in their shows. I know the bass player would play a solo every night. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I was definitely not watching that set, but Soul Asylum was on that tour, right? Were they with you?
Yeah, they were pretty. I mean, that was when they had the big hit, the Runaway Train.
Yeah, but they feel like there's like a little bit of a parallel with you guys there, because they had like a whole bunch of indie records before their kind of big record with Grave Dancers Union. So was there any kind of like synergy there with those guys, or?
I mean, it was it was definitely a good band to be on the bill with. If it would have been them, us, and somebody else, it would have been a little cooler. But no, I think definitely the audience matched. I don't think people would see us and then like be like, oh my God, they're different. It was, and that same summer that was the. What do you call it? The tour with the Butthole Surfers and the Stone Temple Pilots and stuff. We got offered that tour. For some reason, we didn't do it. I don't know. Maybe we should have. But I don't know what would have happened then. The thing is with that Alternative Nation tour, it was 60 shows and it was all summer, and we got a lot of people see us. That wouldn't. The record probably sold more records because of that tour. I don't know. But then we kind of like. Didn't jump on another record right away for various reasons, and because it took like another 3 years, we kind of if we had got another record out like in 1994, maybe we would have like had a gold record with already, but we didn't. So
Dust did wind up being a lot of people's favorite Screaming Trees record. So there's that. I know it wasn't the gold record, but I think it definitely would be considered a lot of people's favorites.
Dust. Yeah, it's my favorite. As far as I like all the SST ones, but I think it was the record where we finally did what we wanted to do the whole time, make like a timeless sort of rock record that would, that we really like. I mean, that was always the thing with me. Like if I wasn't in the Screaming Trees, I would have been the huge fan, probably the biggest fan. So that's.
Is there any song off of that album that you wish would have got to be a single instead of that?
I thought that we had two. We wanted "Make My Mind" to be the first single, not "All I Know." I mean, "All I Know" I like a lot, and it's but it's awfully kind of derivative. Psychedelic sort of thing, but I wrote it, so what do you expect, right? But yeah, Make My Mind was an interesting one, and also I would have had Make My Mind first, and then second I would have had Look at You, because I thought that was kind of interesting, because we originally did that song with no drums, and it was kind of mellower stuff, and I've always liked it, but it didn't quite. I never thought of it as a single. Then when we went back in and Barrett overdubbed drums, we put a guitar solo and stuff then, and it just like popped out like that should have been a single. Look at You. I think that would have been I could see the kids like swaying back and forth, or something. But that would have been a good, the ballad song. We never had the ballad. I mean, they kind of tried that with Dollar Bill, but it wasn't really a ballad. It was like the third single. The third single is always the ballad, right?
I feel like that was more of a blues song than it was a ballad. I understand why they probably went with it, right?
I think that was the intention, that it was mellower, because I know that's how like a lot of the labels work. When they the singles, like you see a lot of bands, they have the first single, and it will be like the rockin' song, and then that was like with Soul Asylum. The first thing off the record was Somebody Is Shoved, and then they had Runaway Train. If we would have had something like that, maybe, but we went further in the music business than we ever even dreamed of. So just putting out Clairvoyance was pretty, putting out a record was all we really wanted to do, be a real band. But then getting signed to SST was kind of like, this is like, our dream come true. So after that, it was all gravy, although we never made very much money. That was never the goal. But that's the problem, is when you get, especially in the major label years, it's like, well, now, you really can't go and have another career doing something else. We got to commit to this. I think that was one of the reasons of like Pickerel not, quitting the band, because I guess he didn't want to commit to like years of touring, and not being able to do anything else, because that's pretty much what it was like. We were totally committed to the band 100% until it was over. So,
do you miss playing live? Do you still do anything?
A little bit. I mean, I don't know. It's been 25 years since I've been on stage, so yeah, I don't think I could even come close to doing the shit I used to. Like, I watch some of those old things. I don't know how I managed to not die.
There's a lot of running and rolling. There was a rolling around.
Yeah. Well, see, there was some clip of Hendrix when he's playing guitar and he just flips backwards and comes back around, does a backflip and gets back up. That was what inspired the the rolling around thing.
So I saw a few things online that this was a couple of years ago, I think you were looking for masters. So have you been involved? Because a lot of the bands that I talk to, bands that have been around for a while and some stuff gets repressed or re-released, they're not involved with. It's some label thing. But have you been involved with, like you mentioned, the Wrong Turn live record and some of the other things that have been Record Store Day ones? Are those you involved in that, or is this like...
Yeah, pretty much only me. That's all me. That's all I'm doing it. Yeah. Well, see, the thing with the Wrong Turn of Jehannan record was Van found that about 10, probably 12, 13 years ago by now. And he was going to put it out. He had a label called Strange Earth Records, and he was going to put it out on that. But for various reasons, it never happened. And after he died, I was like, I want to get this thing out, because it was his goal to do it. And it's also really good, it's an interesting live album because it was recorded in the studio, even though it was live, so, and it sounds really good. And plus it's interesting because, like, especially if I ever get the CD out, it's got, I guess it was on Bandcamp like that. It's got 4 extra songs that are all from Uncle Anesthesia. So it's almost like Uncle Anesthesia live. Because that was what was out. That was like, we recorded it in early 91.
I didn't realize that there were extra songs out there. I'm going to have to go find.
Yeah, I think I got it up on YouTube with them, if I remember right.
And you also had Weird Things Happen, right? Weird Things Happen was another one that you did?
That was... Too? Yeah, I was going to do Clairvoyance for Record Store Day in last year, 24, but didn't come together yet at that point. And so I was like, well, maybe, after Mark passed away, I was got my 4-track out a couple months after and going over some of the old demos. And if I found all this stuff, from 86, 87, that, we'd actually record or written together, because, probably on Clairvoyance, there were some things that we got, in the same room, sat down and wrote together, like on, Pictures in My Mind on Other Worlds. That was probably the first song, as far as I know, Mark ever wrote. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought right then anyway. So, okay. What were we talking about?
Right.
We were talking about songs that, how we'd written songs mostly.
So,
yeah, like Mark would change the lyrics. I would write the song, and he'd either change all the lyrics in a couple of cases, or some of them. I can't. Yeah, I still you have to go through. Maybe Mark might have wrote that line. Maybe I can't remember. It's hard to remember.
I was going to ask you again. I don't necessarily like to use Wikipedia as my source material, but it did mention that. I think you were mentioning it as we had some audio issues there. That Pictures in My Mind was. It's listed as the first song he wrote with you. Is that an accurate statement? That
Yeah. I don't know if Mark hadn't even. I don't even think he ever sang before. I mean, if you listen to Other Worlds and listen to Mark's vocals, it's a hell of a lot different than Clairvoyance. I don't know. He really hadn't sang hardly at all. You know, it was like, I think one time he sang, or maybe he was playing drums. When they first got the band together with Mark Pickerel and Van and him, he was going to play drums. But then then, yeah, I think Mark Pickerel was maybe going to sing. I'm not sure what was going to happen. I wasn't in it right at first, like for the first day or two or something. But yeah, so yeah, he definitely probably that was the first thing he ever wrote. It was weird because all the time, you know, in the time of the Screaming Trees, Mark never brought one song to the Screaming Trees. He never said, "Here's a song I wrote, let's do it." I always wished he would have. I don't know why he didn't. But that was the cool thing about Weird Things Happening. There were actually songs that he'd written, like the melodies and all the vocals, and I just on the guitar, you know, came up with the chords and stuff. So that's like a lot of the songs, most of the ones that are by me and him were like that. You know, there's about 6 of them there, like Baby Nicotine and Electrify, you know, and the melodies are not like mine, and the melodies really aren't like his later stuff either. He has a real distinctive melodic and chord sort of thing, probably because he couldn't play guitar much until like, you know, the early 90s. But it was a lot way different than other stuff. That's one of the main reasons I wanted to put it out.
And with that context, it's very cool, but you kind of open up a question for me there. So how did you guys write then? If he didn't bring songs in, would it all kind of happen when you were jamming or in the studio?
No,
or
I would write
in,
stuff on my 4-track, you know, a completed song, and then I give him tapes. And, you know, he either like hated it or liked it. Sometimes he liked it a whole lot, you know, and those ones would, you know, were decided to record. So I gave him the tape, and then he has changed whatever lyrics. Now, see, that's the thing with Sweet Oblivion was a completely different process. I don't really know why it happened, but it was, well, one of the things was, I don't know if people know that, like the whole first, until like 1990 or so, Lanigan was completely sober. He'd stopped drinking. You know, he was like out of high school, you know, town, you know, he was selling drugs, drinking, completely like probably gonna drink so much he was probably gonna die by the time he was 25 or something, you know. Then he got in a really serious accident. He worked in the pea fields, you know, where they'd like use combines to pick up the peas and stuff out in eastern Washington, and he got run over by a truck.
Oh, God.
And it didn't break his legs, but it bruised the hell out of him. He couldn't walk. So right at the beginning, when the band started in 1985, that's what he was dealing with. So I think the doctors told him, "Man, if you don't stop, you know, drinking and stuff, you're going to kill yourself." And get scared enough. So, you know, I don't know if he was completely cold sober the whole 5 years, but as far as I know, he was. You know, he lived in Seattle for a while. So, but then he gradually kind of moved the other way by when we went on tour in 1990. In Europe, like people kept giving us pot and stuff, and he decided to smoke pot, and so I was like, okay, well, smoking pot. And I always thought his voice on Uncle Anesthesia, he was smoking pot at the time. And so it was like Terry Date was one of those producers, like, you know, smoke pot constantly while you're recording the record, and so I think that his voice actually was somewhat different on Uncle Anesthesia because of that, possibly. I could be completely wrong. This always seemed that way to me. But, yeah, so that was... but then in the summer, when we were on tour for Uncle Anesthesia, when Dan Peters was in the band, we had this van wreck. We had 2 vehicles. Like, we had a minivan with most of the people were riding in, and the equipment van, Lanigan was riding in. There were 2 of the road guys. And we were going through Wyoming, and on black ice, it flipped. And it ended up on the other side of the road, flipped over, but nobody was badly hurt, but the van was destroyed, and we had to regroup, and we ended up getting a rental vehicle. But in the meantime, I think we were in Chicago, and he started drinking, and that was kind of like, what the heck? Mark's drinking again. So we didn't know what we were going to do. But the weird thing is when that whole year, even though he had some pretty crazy shit going on, as far as like, he was much more sociable and wanted to hang out and write songs together and do shit like that. And you know, that's what we did in all of after we came back from that tour, um, we knew Dan was going back to Mudhoney, so we needed to find a new drummer, and we always get the first person that we we come across. So we did audition Barrett, but he had a van and he had a place to practice, so that was it was just like serendipitous. It turned out he was such a great drummer, but so yeah, we spent that whole from the summer of '91 till like early '92, going over to Barrett's house and rehearsing with Mark there. He never wanted to come to rehearsal. Mark would usually not come to rehearsal. Late after that and before that, we just rehearsed without him. But he would be there, and he'd even go long. He wanted to go longer than we did, which was crazy. And he'd also come over to my place. I was living in Seattle at that time now, and sometimes Van would be there, and we'd write songs together. That's how we came up with Shadow in the Season. Like, I was playing the guitar, and he sang that first part. Of course, then he left and said do the rest of it. But still, it was definitely or stuff like Butterfly was it was taken from a chorus of an older song I had, and I came up with the chords and he rewrote words. But the weird thing was when we got out to record the album, and we went to New York, and we had all the we did it mostly. He sang scratch vocals and stuff, but he had to overdub the vocals, and he didn't have, as far as we knew, he would still have lyrics to do for about half the songs. And we didn't know if he'd written them already or if he hadn't written them already. And so it was time for him to do the vocals, and he disappeared, and they found, turned up 3 days later, massively hungover, just the worst hangover you can imagine. And then they said, everyone leave the studio, he's going to sing. So we did for 3 or 4 days. And then we got the tape, so we were just our jaws dropped. I can't believe that's the most amazing shit. Because I think, the stuff on Sweet Oblivion, I think, is his best performance, probably of all time. I would say, at least with the Screaming Trees. And plus he, came up with about half the lyrics. I don't know if he had them already or not, but whatever he did worked. So that was good. But it was in the later years, just dealing with the heroin and stuff. That was a real drag, But we kept trying. We kept trying to go on, and he wanted to go on. I mean, one time, in probably '95, we'd been going for 2 years, and we'd done a record right after we got off a tour from the Spin Doctors thing in late '93, early '94, but it just didn't turn out very well. We decided not to use it, and so we spent 2 years writing. I just got married. My wife was then. I was going to move out to New York, which I did later, but I had to stay in Seattle for 2 years. My wife was, because she worked as a college professor in New York, so she couldn't come out to Seattle except in the summer. Spent 2 years writing songs. I probably wrote a couple hundred. In fact, not exaggerating, at least 150 to 200 songs for Dust. Most of them ended up not. There was probably a whole nother record of pretty good material that I have demos of. Some of them with Mark singing, but we got Van and me were just we can't go on like this. It's we're not getting into the studio. We're not going to do this record. And we told Mark we were going to quit. Change the name of the band, get someone else to sing, something like that. And he would not let us quit. I don't know why. Especially with some of the things he said in his book. I don't know why he just didn't. Why didn't he just quit if he hated it so much? I don't know. Nobody was stopping him.
I don't know how Butterfly was not a huge hit. By the way, that song should have been a huge hit. I don't know why it wasn't.
It's a forced single. Maybe that was why.
It could be. Yeah, it was deep in the single rotation. But I had one question. You were mentioning, how you would send him tapes and he would love some of them, would hate some of them. Are there any ones that you kind of pushed him to do because you loved it, even though he didn't like it, and you talked him into it, or vice versa? No, he'd never do that. He was I could never make him do anything, I think, plus I trust he had the best
You know, so he was really like an editor, like a really, really, really good editor. You know, because the editors even write parts of stuff. You know, like great editors, and he had the best. Like, you know, he knew what was good and what was not good. His musical taste and his you know, he just discerned what was good for us and what wasn't. And I don't really have any regrets about the only ones that I probably the other songs that we didn't do for. There's probably about 10 songs that we should have done, I think, for Dust that would have been really great. But, you know, the ones we did were great too. So it could have been a double record, but that would have been a whole can of worms when they got
So I have a deep cut question here. One of my all-time favorite songs is The Velvet Underground's What Goes On. And you guys did a cover of that for, I think, was it Unpiecing Jigsaw or something?
It was a
like
comp
that?
on... It was like Velvet Underground tribute. Oh, I can't remember the name of it.
Are you the Velvet fan, or did someone talk you into that one? And
Everyone, yeah, no, Mark and me both were yeah. In fact, I realized that was like we played that even like our very first show. We played that.
Oh,
We've
wow.
been playing it for quite a few years at the time we actually recorded it. So yeah, both me and Mark are both totally in the Velvet Underground. Probably
Excellent.
bands too.
Yeah, I go back to that cover all the time. I have like my makeshift Scream Trees B-side album that I created with that particular one on there.
It's one of those songs that's just so easy to play, you know. And yeah, it's just an amazing song.
Yeah, Lou Reed wasn't breaking anybody's fingers or anything with the work he was doing, but the stuff that he wrote was just so iconic and so awesome. And it worked so well with your sound and Mark's voice and everything.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of, you know, a lot of the best songs, like, you know, I really like that, just real simple, something, you know, not a lot to them, but it's just a great song.
Yeah. Turbo, what else you got for? We've kept him so long, but there's so much to talk about. Are you okay for a few more minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, awesome. Turbo.
You got to work with both Chris Cornell and Chris Goss, probably the two most prominent people that I could think of that you worked with. I know you worked with a lot of people. How was that?
Yeah, Chris Goss, that was a fun story because, you know, he was there during Dust and we were recording Make My Mind, and he was like, we did the backup vocals like all live with him, me, and Van, and he was like directing us and stuff, and he was singing too. That was really fun. I mean, they're almost, I think they work, but you know, it's almost like overproduced sounding because they're like, but it was all done live though. We may have done like one overdub on them or so, you know, one double, but yeah, that was fun. It was like the Beatles singing live or something. Because sometimes me and Van, like live, we always had a hard time with the backup vocals because it's just hard to hear yourself and like, you know, singing in tune sometimes wasn't. I finally, I think before we did the last Lollapalooza tour, the '96 thing, Van, we started practicing the backup vocals a lot more. So, but yeah, that was really fun. And then Cornell was just like, he didn't really do that much. He was just there. It was kind of one of those things, like, you know, it was like a liaison type of thing because they'd done the album with Terry Date, and Terry Date was more of a metal producer. We weren't even like by a million miles like a metal band, so we figured, like, you know, Cornell understands what the band's supposed to be like, so we'll have him here. And you know, I ended up singing backups and some stuff, and played basketball. They played basketball a lot with Cornell. I remember that.
Who was better? Was he good at basketball?
I think so. I didn't usually play. It was usually Mark and Van and against him and maybe Terry Date. I can't remember. It was a double, maybe basically a double 2-on-2 thing. They had London Bridger. They had a basketball hoop out outside so you could go relax, play basketball.
I was trying to remember. You said I was trying to remember if I ever caught y'all live, and there's a lot of hazy moments from back then. But you said '96 Lollapalooza. I'm trying to remember which one was that. Who was?
That was Metallica, Soundgarden,
I didn't see that one.
Ramones. Yeah, that was the Metallica thing. That was kind of nuts. I mean, it was cool with Soundgarden, but yeah, see, we had the same managers as Metallica at the time, which ended up being a really stupid idea. it got us on. I guess I don't know if that's how we got on Lollapalooza or not, but that was kind of like, you know, the year it wasn't really that great, but there was a high point. So I mean, because there was a lot of like, you know, the Ramones were on almost the whole thing. They had Cheap Trick on one show, Devo on at least one show. I think Rage Against the Machine was on a few shows in Florida. You know, so they brought in like extra people who weren't on. Waylon Jennings was on one, and people didn't like him.
I feel like that was the Guided by Voices year too. I'm a big Guided by Voices fan, so I'm trying. I know they came in one year, and there's a whole big thing with them and the Beastie Boys playing basketball, which is why I asked you about basketball earlier.
Yeah, that was '94, I think.
'94. Okay. Just, is there a band that sticks out in your head? Obviously, you said you guys. I mean, just that one tour, you played 6 dates in the summer. But is there a band that you played with that still kind of blows your mind today that you shared a stage with them? There's probably a lot, but is there anyone that sticks out in your mind?
Like pretty much, everyone opened for us. And, you know, I mean, probably Nirvana. I mean, it doesn't really blow my mind because they were just like friends of ours and, you know, they were just another band. But when I saw they played in Ellensburg in 88, really, really early, like, you know, yeah, like April '88. So this was way before their first single even came out and stuff. And I know Mark was too, just blown away by them. And sometimes they weren't that good live, but this time something clicked and they only got to play about 5 songs because like they had to close the place down. It was like Hal Home Center, like the community center in Ellensburg, where they just started having shows. And the city didn't really like it. You could rent it for that. So anyway, and I was amazed. I thought they remind me of what like Blue Cheer. That's what I thought. I was totally seeing, like, you know, like watching like Blue Cheer or something like that. Totally heavy and just melodic too at the same time. And then over the years, you know, they became like my favorite band totally. And it's funny now to see people like, oh, Nirvana's overrated. And you know what happened after they got popular, sort of like, yeah, I can see why you think that, but they were just totally genuine. There was nothing fake about them. And Kurt was just an amazing songwriter. He had such a cool sense of melody, and adding it with the heavy thing just was, you know, it just clicked, you know, and it really worked, you know. Even on Bleach, there's tons of melodies in there. You know, you listen to that record and think, it's so heavy. It's like really, but, yeah, so then, and until, I saw them. I figured I must see them 9 or 10 times, probably, counting the times we played with them. We played with them, one of the shows, let's see, what year was that? Was that 89, probably? We played in Portland with them and Tad. That was quite a show.
Tad.
And I remember Kurt was, like, upside down all over the place. Yeah.
Love Tad.
What
Tad.
A
great band. It's funny you mentioned. I shared this video that I saw with Turbo about Billy Corgan, pretty much saying that he invented Kurt Cobain's guitar sound and that Kurt stole More Than a Smells Like Teen Spirit from Boston's More Than a Feeling. And I'm like, dude, you invented grunge, you invented guitar, you invented.
What year did they even start? I mean, I remember everything was already going when I remember that. The first album, which is a great record.
Yeah.
Gish, yeah. I love that record, but that was like 91. That was like that's like late to the party.
Yeah. I just like, well, you.
Yeah.
And I think Turbo said it's like Pete Townsend invented heavy metal. You know, apparently Billy Corgan.
Yeah, I mean, has he ever seen the video from the Melvins when they were in high school, like from '83? You know, that was like 10 years before that, man. You know, I don't know. Yeah, I don't understand. I really like the Smashing Pumpkins, at least their earlier stuff. And I just, in the last 10 or 15 years, I don't understand why he's got such an ego. It's like, why not just, you know, be happy with what you did?
To invite Billy Corgan on the show to rebut our discussion here, right, Turbo? See if Billy comes and talks to us. Sure. Yeah. This has been amazing.
That's great.
Thank you so much. And just to Turbo, do you have anything else before we let
you
go? Okay. It's funny because we were talking. I don't even know how this happened, and Turbo's like, "We should get him on the show," and I'm like, and I kind of chuckled to myself, and then I'm like, I saw your post about the Trees record, and I'm like, I'm just gonna ask. And how cool is it that you're like, sure, and the next day you're on the show? So amazing stuff. Thank you so
Yeah, I
much.
like doing stuff like that. I haven't done anything for quite a while, but I decided I'm going to start doing stuff again.
It's very, very
Especially
cool.
to get this out.
And one more question before you go. You have a ton of amazing solo stuff that you do.
Thank you.
I know Turbo, your favorite one is
Revelations and Fuzz.
Revelations and Fuzz.
Oh, yeah.
Just a
Thanks.
great
Love
record.
that album.
We also want to know if there are any copies of that floating around vinyl wise, because there
I
are
don't
people
know.
who would be
There-
very interested in that.
There may be some in a warehouse in Italy. It costs so much to get. It costs so much to get them. Eventually, they may get them. I may re-release some of that stuff because the only press, like the vinyl pressings, were from the company Vincibus Eruptum. They did like 3 of my records on vinyl, and just, it was really limited, like 300 copies. So that's something in the next couple of years I'm thinking of doing is either doing the records or maybe a comp of all the songs from it, or maybe new records. I don't know. I'll see.
I can confirm there is a market for it, for sure. Just
That's
based
good.
on
Yeah,
just
one of the
based on
things
what
that
I'm
sucks is
seeing.
it costs. So, I haven't pressed my own vinyl on this Clairvoyance thing. It just costs so much to do limited. If you're not doing 1,000 copies of something, it's really, really costly because it costs about the same to do 500 as it does to do 1,000.
No.
It's we they get that there's like a price point there. It's like it's not worth it. Too bad it's not just free.
Well, what I can say is I'm pretty sure that everyone's going to be super excited for the Clairvoyance repress. The pre-orders tomorrow on the Screaming Trees website.
Yeah, Port Merchandise, Screaming Trees, and also Revolver Magazine. And then, at least, like I said, in the Northwest in August, you'll probably be able to get it at some of the record stores. I don't know, because I've got 500 going to the Screaming Trees store, the online store, 500 to Revolver, which is a different color. And then I got about 500 more that I'm selling in stores. So I don't know. Eventually, maybe later this year or next year, I'll repress it. But it just turned out that's the really limited thing is the first thing we do with it. So
Amazing. We're all very excited for it. Gary Lee Conner, thank you so much. It blows my mind
thank
that
you.
you're on our
Everyone
show.
have a good day.
And good luck with that. And then come back and talk to us again if you don't mind, maybe for some of the solo stuff. And
let me know.
it'll be awesome. Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Okay,
it.
you too, man. Take it easy, guys. Later.
Have a good day.